Yeah, look, it's really exciting to have you here. This will be a very insightful discussion for mission-driven AI adoption, I guess, is kind of the overall discussion what we want to talk about today, specifically for NFPs in health care or health and science. But of course, we understand there are people in the room who might be representing different industry verticals within NFPs. So we hope the insights from today will be shared across, different sectors. Of course, there's sensitive information that NFPs might want to consider. So yeah, we want to make sure we cover everything. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land we stand on today. And I'd like to pay the respects to past and present elders. And if we have any in the room today of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people, I would like to extend that respect. So I'm going to actually fast track a little bit so that we get a lot of time with our lovely panelist speakers. But I do want to just paint a little bit of a picture about what we're going to do today. But before we do that, just a few housekeeping things. If you need the toilet, there's one when you came in the lift, just to your left instead of going right, just around the corridor. The exits are right next to that as well. There's a staircase there. There are staff members outside, so if you need anything, feel free to ask them. They're very friendly and they don't bite hard. Our agenda today, so we'll have a 30-minute panel discussion with our lovely panelists, which I'll introduce in just a moment. And it'll be followed by a 10-minute or 15-minute Q&A section. If you do have any burning questions, I encourage you to hold them until the Q&A section, just to make sure that we can have a nice free-flowing discussion. And anything that may or may not be answered on the day today, I will certainly follow up with the content of it as well. And on that note, I am recording our panel discussion today. None of your faces will be in it because it's basically covering the front. But we might get a few photos as we're enjoying a networking breakfast together. So if anyone really doesn't want to be posted on LinkedIn or be promoted, please just come and see me and let me know. Okay, so that's the housekeeping stuff. Before I introduce our AI panelists, I just want to paint the scene. So I guess we're here because AI is no longer a question of if, but how. And I think for NFPs in the health and science sector, that how is such an important component because you are dealing with very sensitive information, you're dealing with humans, it has to be human-centered, and it has to be mission-driven for your organization. Today we'll explore how NFPs can harness AI for good. And I think there's a lot of ethical discussions around that too, right? We're all concerned AI is going to start doing all our thinking for us and, solve all our medical problems for us. But we need a human in the loop. And I think that's what our discussion can really, focus on today. We want to understand how to boost operational efficiency, how to unlock data insights to make better decisions for your organization's mission, and also how to deepen your engagement with your customers, patients, clients, and whatever you want to call them. All while staying true to the values that your organization's mission is aligned to. So we understand you might be thinking certain questions which has brought you into the room today. It might be around how do we adopt AI responsibly and ethically? You might be considering, are we digitally ready? Is our data ready? That is a key question that's coming up for us a lot when we talk about AI. It's really focusing on all our disrupted systems and ways of working, which brings me to the topic of how can we empower our people along for the journey? And that might be your staff members, it might be your patients, your clients, your customers. So our discussion topics today are going to be broadly around 3 different topics. We're going to talk about what responsible governed AI looks like in practice. And that's the thing, right? The how. How does it actually look? We're looking for practical steps now. The next is the pathways to adoption. So how do we bring our skills of our organization, whether it's the people or the customers, clients, how do we raise that? How do we bring partners along in terms of technology vendors? You might want to bring a partner to actually give you the strategy, give you the AI roadmap, give you the guidance that you might not have ever thought of before. And the last would be basically focusing on change management, which we have an expert to talk about that today, about how do we actually bring those people along for the journey. So a quick thing about who Solentive are, and then I'll throw it to our panelists. So we are a digital technology consultancy, and we very much focus on the business-led side of adopting technology. So we very much think our differentiator is the people and process side of technology, and making sure that not only technology is used in the right way, but it actually lands to drive your mission for your organization, your business, to actually get the outcomes you're actually doing, and to drive meaningful purpose. So, without further ado, I would love to introduce our panel speakers today. I'll give them one by one. I'll give them a little bit of a light here with a bit of an overview of who we are speaking to today. So first, I'd like to start with Rebecca Swinfield, so CEO of Solentive. Come on down. Come on down. We'll get you to sit at the end. Sure. Yeah. So Becca's been with our company since 2011, championing many different roles within Solentive, ultimately guiding her to her current role as CEO, which she's been in for the last 4 years. She brings over 2 decades of experience in service delivery, project management, and strategic leadership. Becca's not only a driving force behind our people-first culture and innovation-led approach, but also as an industry leader. She's been recognized as a finalist for Advancing Women in Technology at our recent event that we're invited to by the GTIA. Outside of Solentive, Rebecca also volunteers as the non-executive director at the Sydney Dogs and Cats Home. There you go. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So next I'd love to invite down Susan McCarthy, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Flourish Australia. Come on down.
Are you dating me?
So bachelor number 1.
No, I will pay for purpose.
So Susan is a dedicated leader in health, human rights, social justice, with extensive experience in program development, operations and service delivery across international, national and regional regional organisations. There we go. As Chief Operating Officer at Flourish Australia, she oversees all service delivery, leveraging her academic background in public health, science and governance to drive strategic and operational improvements that enhance well-being. Okay, next we've got Lewis Gamez, who is Solentive's Solutions Architect. So welcome down. No awards here, no.
The award is sitting next one.
So Lewis's career spans very vastly across both Australia and Latin America when it comes to IT and telecommunications. He's got many certificates in cybersecurity and enterprise systems and the like. So welcome, Lewis.
Thank you.
Last but not least, we've got Huw Thomas, who is a change expert and entrepreneur. Come on down. So Huw is a leadership and behaviour change expert. He teaches people how to change anything without friction, fatigue or failures. His expertise is in influencing behaviour change individually and at scale. He's a sought-after leader in organisational change and strategy implementation and executive leadership. Huw has led award-winning projects and advised and trained thousands of leaders in over 200 projects spanning across 150 diverse organizations, including multi-billion-dollar ASX-listed enterprises, government agency, multinational, and for-purpose community organizations. That is a mouthful. Huw is also a practicing non-executive director and chairs the board of Living My Way Limited, a registered NDIS provider. Thank you, guys. Let's get started with our discussion. So I guess the first topic we want to talk about is why AI must be considered differently for NFPs. So Beck, I'd love to throw the first question at you. So Solentive have assisted with many different industry verticals, whether it's government, private healthcare, and the like. What's different for NFPs when it comes to AI adoption?
Yeah, good question. I mean, obviously you said it in the intro around sort of mission driven. I think obviously there's key differences around, the resources that are available to NFPs. But also the accountability and governance structure is quite different around sort of the transparency of decisions. And so when it does come to AI, very much the the bias component of it, transparency of AI, and making sure that you've got the human in the loop, very much around making sure that technology isn't a barrier to engagement, because a lot of the organisations that you guys are sort of championing and work for really are often, very people-led. So there's a lot of similarities in some of those industries, but also some kind of very discrete differences that you need to sort of consider when you're thinking about what the right use case is. And we're very big advocates of that. You can do it, but should you? And what does that mean for, your business and the people that work within it? So, yeah.
Susan, I'm curious to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think what Beck said makes a lot of sense, and I think for most NFPs it'd really be a question of how does this align to our purpose and values? Why are we doing this? Of course, I think NFPs need to be sustainable, and so there needs to be efficiency gains from it, but that's not really where you get your buy-in, right? It's really around what difference is this going to make to the people that we serve. And so that lens constantly has to be applied to anything you do in NFPs, but particularly to these kind of solutions that I think can make people feel really nervous. And obviously tech isn't always at the forefront of people who work in NFP, aren't always thinking about what's the next tech solution. So it's about also framing it to what difference is it going to make to their jobs, and then obviously the people they support. So I think just the lens, to what Beck was saying too, it is different. And I also think you need to think about the impact it's going to have, not just from a financial perspective.
There's definitely a lot to consider there, isn't there? And I guess for both of you as leaders, I mean, what would you say in terms of, what would your first step be to approaching this conversation with your organisation and with the people that you're trying to lead? Maybe Susan, I can start with you.
Look, from our organisation's perspective, we pretty much approach anything from a consultation. So it's really about going out and saying to people, what do you think? What do you think of this? So we just had a very similar discussion yesterday, actually, with leaders in the organisation around what do you think we need to do next? We've just done a really large implementation, so starting to think about, could we look at some kind of AI around that? So for us, it's about how do you engage people right from the start to get them thinking about the solutions that they think would most benefit their jobs and the people we support. As I said, we don't do anything unless it has those outcomes, so we frame everything like that.
And so Beck, what are your thoughts?
I mean, the only thing I'd add to that is I completely agree. I think it's very much starting with what you're trying to achieve, which obviously, is sort of the mission at the end of the day. And then what are the key kind of pain points and barriers getting in the way of that? And then, what are the, steps you need to take to get to that? And I think, we call that in the industry co-design, what Susan's talking about, but, certainly engaging internally, but also with, with the members and or the service users or whoever your kind of end customer is. I think kind of particularly in not-for-profit, you can be dealing with vulnerable people. So I think, involving them in the process and working through like what makes sense to us may not make sense to them. There's definitely some additional considerations from a standard usability perspective than what we would, do in sort of insurance, for example. Yeah.
And so I guess on this topic, when it comes to AI, there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of risks that we're always considerate of. What do we think on this topic around the risks that AI poses to sensitive information and data?
For me?
Sure.
Yeah. I guess risks around, you mean risks around sort of data or just broader risks?
I guess
for NFP?
perhaps adopting AI without a framework.
Yeah, fair enough. I'd say the big thing around AI is sort of trust. I think you've got to kind of consider that. It is an opportunity to obviously gain efficiencies, but done wrong, it can be very damaging to the organisations from a trust perspective. So I'd say that's a sort of big one for NFPs. Obviously there's the compliance piece as well, that in some of the organisations you guys are working in, that could be very, business critical and can be very damaging. So, I think you've really got to be thinking about, is it trusted AI and having those checks and balances, making sure that you've got the human in the loop for anything that you're doing. But You can also start with very low risk use cases as well. So, thinking about more like your productivity and efficiency, rather than sort of doing a digital twin to your service user as your first AI project, right? So I think there's certainly things you can be doing around the edges as a first toe dip. And as Susan's saying, using co-design and those sort of pieces to get feedback loops and sort of, start small. That's what I'd say.
Yes, there's quite a lot to take in, and sometimes people get overwhelmed with, I've got to do everything and I've got to do it yesterday.
I'm going to get left behind.
I'm going to get
yes,
left
if you do
behind,
absolutely nothing, but not necessarily, right? I mean, I think, and there is that, in the industry, there's a lot of that hype, isn't there, around, we're all going to have no jobs in 2 years versus, oh no, it's just, the next sort of blockchain. It's somewhere in the between of those things, and I think we've just got to be thinking as leaders. We were talking in the break, it's a leadership problem, AI, not a technology one, and I think you've got to think, how's it impacting your business model and your sustainability? It does pick a little bit at the value of some of the things that we're providing, particularly as service organisations, and then sort of what's the impact on your people, and how do you kind of reframe that for them and take them on that journey, which I think, obviously Huw can talk to, but yeah.
Yeah, and on that note, Huw, I'd love to throw the question to you. Like this is where your expertise come in. How do you manage dealing with people who are fear-based when it comes to change in AI? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think a lot of feelings come up for people during change, and we often think it's about we have to teach them how to use the thing and then they're going to just make the change happen and adopt it, and it's never the case. Capability building is one part of it, but addressing the kind of underlying psychological resistance we experience is the harder part. Just like when all of us tend to, as I've talked to Solentive about, when all of us try to exercise and change our habits for the better, we always struggle with that. It's not because of lack of knowledge. It's for a range of different factors. And it's the same with technology. And so I think with the fear part, we have to find a way to make it safe. And so how do we do that? And I think some experimentation, and as I think Susan and Beck touched on, we have to connect it to the things that they care about, and show that there's a clear problem so that there's a cost of inaction. So we can say, look, do we really want to be in this unprofitable state where there's a lot of pressure and we're incredibly lean and challenged, or would we like to free up some of our capacity so we can do more of the things we love, like serving the people we serve? And that might get a bit of buy-in and go, okay, maybe I should lean into this, and it creates a sense of openness to the change. And I think the others, as Susan said, consulting people and involving them in it. You never want people to feel like this is being done to them. So change has to be done with people. If it feels like it's being done to them, the fear is only going to raise up, and you get this sense of reactance where, oh, this is being done to me, it's forced upon me, this can't be good. Even when we see positive benefits, we tend to resist against that sort of authoritarian approach. Whereas if we're inviting people into the fold to say, hey, we want to experiment with you, we'd like your input on this, and we want to hear your say, like, what's the biggest headache we can potentially get rid of for you in your job, and letting them have their say. But I think also it's a mixture of that, but also providing some leadership and direction around what you think is the best opportunity. Is it for greater insights? Is it for efficiency? Is it for amplifying and providing a better quality service? Like, what's the thing which is going to help people lean into it a little bit? I think that's probably a good place to start.
And I guess I can give you a 15-second chance to pitch where you come in on the journey when it comes to, you are very much...
No pressure, you.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm expecting this
15
question.
seconds.
Maybe you can let us know just a little bit about when you come in when it comes to organisations doing some sort of AI uplift, and then they bring in you as a change management expert.
Yeah, I'm probably less of a change management expert and more of a change leadership expert. I have been a change manager for a big part of my career, but I see change leadership as different. It's less about project methodology and implementation. It's more about the human behavioural influence side. So, I come in at any time that I'm needed, and whether it's at the beginning or middle or end, it doesn't really matter. The sooner the better, I always say. But what I try and do is to help people understand what it takes to break down that resistance, and to anticipate all kinds of resistance, and to strategize actually what the change is about. Often we think the change is about the solution. Like, we have this thing with AI, it's a tool, and it's like a tradie rocking up to a building site with a hammer and going, I'm just going to hammer stuff today. And there's actually no nails to be hammered. There's screws and other things, and they're just whacking stuff, and they're just creating a lot of damage. And so we're not sort of saying, what is the actual problem we're trying to solve? What's the vision of what success looks like? And then understand the gap in the middle. And that's where you start talking about the solution. That's where the AI piece comes in. But we tend to focus a lot on that middle part. We actually haven't got clarity around what's this problem, because understanding the problem is kind of where you get that sense of, oh, we need to do something about this, and there's a cost of inaction. The vision's really about the benefits, and then people start to weigh up the two, and they start to see, well, this is worth doing. And that's when you get them leaning into the potential solution. But it also just means you're really, you're targeting and using the solution in the right way. So I try and get that strategy piece right for organisations up front. And then it's about understanding the psychology of the behaviour change and giving them some techniques on how to do it in a way which is going to get maximum involvement from people and commitment, because once you get that in an organisation, you get a sort of wave of support, and it's not just you sort of herding the cats. It's like you've got this, a tidal wave of momentum and support, and that just unlocks a ton of value.
There's a lot there to consider, isn't there? And I think when it comes to behaviour change, leadership change as well at scale, it's very much from the top down, is my understanding, right? Like, is that sort of where you view it as well, right? So it's like, if the leaders are moving the team in one way, then everyone else will sort of follow suit.
I think it's two-way. So too often, I think organisations will delegate to a project team and say they're going to make the change happen. It's not the case. So there's executive leaders and boards play a decision-making sponsorship component and a leadership role. They have to go out and talk about it, use their authority for good, but also not be too authoritative. And the project teams sort of build these solutions and have a structured approach to make sure it's implemented on time to budget, and that there's coordination with all stakeholders. But managers in the business play such a key role, as do the employees. They're the ones that actually need to do the change. So it's about getting all of those elements working closely together. And I see change as kind of like a dance. It's a two-way thing, and it's a dialogue. Change is managed through conversations, not through announcements. If you go out and make big declarative announcements like this is how it's going to be, and you haven't had some conversations first, you're probably going to hit a brick wall. So you want to sow the seeds about the problem, the vision, get their input, use that into shaping the message and the target and how you're going to go about doing it, and then go out and sort of, you can make announcements at that point, because it's going to land a little bit better once you've got that kind of buy-in early.
Yeah. Anyone in the room, is anyone here responsible for making such a change within the company? I'm assuming, given that we're interested in this topic, is, maybe a show of hands if someone's like, sitting here thinking, okay, that's what I've got to do. I've got to, okay, a few nods, okay, cool. I think the Q&A section might be interesting then. Okay, so just shifting the discussion more around now to responsible and governed AI. Susan, I'd love to start with you. Just thinking about like regulation, compliance, and ethics, especially when dealing with sensitive information. What does responsible AI look like in practice for NFPs?
Yeah, I think so from our perspective, I guess where we started first was really getting clear on what our AI position was. And that involved engagement with the board as well as staff around our position. So that was sort of like a broader kind of statement around how are we going to use AI as an organisation. That's not to say it can't change, but initially I think it's really important to be clear with your staff around how they can or can't use AI. And obviously in the background to all of that, we also did a pretty extensive review of our tech in terms of the system, the security, have we got everything in place to make sure that if we do this, we will do it properly and safely. I think there's another component around compliance and governance. So in our situation, as an example, we have programs where the government's very clear on where our data needs to be. So again, looking at all of those things to make sure that you're not doing anything that's against your contract. Obviously you don't anyway, but I think there's just so many layers. So that's probably more like the governance technical component, and then there's obviously the emotion and feelings attached to it all, which I think takes probably in some ways a lot more time to talk to people about. What does it mean for us as an organisation? Why would we do this? They're all the things that kind of overlay all of those sort of technical things that are happening in the background. And to be honest, it's an ongoing conversation. As I alluded to before, we just had this conversation yesterday because I think it's just a constant evolving space, to your point, you know, and for NFPs to keep up with that too, I think is challenging. Like, we're a relatively large sized NFP, but I think, and we can do some of those things I just said, but I think about it in the context of some smaller ones and how do they do that? So
scale the effort.
Yeah, and so I think there's just a lot to consider and to have the resources in house to stay on top of it as well. So another example of that is we did a pilot of co-pilot, as we'd say, but to really sort of test how would we even use it? And to be honest, I think we're at our infancy with some of those things because, you know, you don't know what you don't know, but it was a good experience. Just, I think also in trying to communicate to the teams that when we do this, we'll do it properly.
And what's possible changes all the time.
Yeah,
too,
exactly.
Right? So that also makes it hard to, it's a bit of a moving target, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we think of it as you've got your sort of your AI strategy. So, you know, as Susan's saying, you've got, you know, how are we going to use AI in our business? Then you've got your sort of AI framework, and again, these things can scale. You know, in a small organisation, they might be a small activity. That's really sort of how you're going to govern it. But then you've got your AI culture. I think sometimes that's a little bit of an afterthought, but that's how your people are going to think about AI. Do they think of it as a threat? Do they think of it as an opportunity? And I think that's really the leadership piece around making sure that you frame it how you want your people to think about it, because I think often, you know, yes, as leaders we go out there and say, this is what's happening, and everyone's like, cool, and then we leave them to it and get busy something else, and that's where a lot of the, you know, the fear comes in, because people don't have that clarity around what does that mean for me, sort of specifically, and particularly my identity at work, and I guess that's the change leadership piece as well, right? Yeah.
One great thing I saw around the sort of leaders owning it pretty well is a contact of mine is a CIO at a major health insurer, and they've got thousands of employees, and he got the entire executive team. He's a really great technologist. And he got the entire executive team to create digital twins, and they're experimenting with that. And he's trying to get the leadership team to have almost the most experience out of anyone in the company to get really technical and creating space for them to do that. And they're all really uncomfortable with it, and it's not kind of what they do day to day. So they're trying to get more comfortable with it, get some experience and insight, and so that they feel confident going and talking to their people about it. And I thought that was a great example, which I haven't seen too much of.
Hey, Huw, out of interest, and not to put you on the spot, because we haven't rehearsed this, by the way, so you might be like, nah. But who owns the IP of their digital twin? Do they take it with them?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I only had a quick.
Thing, right?
It's a good point.
Because I think if you're going to, you know, you've got, you know, we've talked about this as well, that we've decided to more go with an AI as its own kind of independent employee. Because otherwise, if it's my twin, don't I own my own image and my own personality or whatever that it's copying? So yeah, I think they're some of the, you know, the ethical conversations that we start bringing. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but you've got to be really clear about that.
Yeah.
You know, just do it and then people leave and then think, well, hang on, I didn't know I was giving up my whole, you know, identity to the organisation. Yeah,
it's funny. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and this guy was talking about, a kind of young guy, talking about how he's just every day he spends 2 hours talking to his AI assistant, and he's trying to just basically upload his conscious to create another version of himself, so he can ask himself questions any day. And he'd been doing this for about a year. And then the interviewer asked him, "Oh, are you worried that like everything in your brain is just going to be in the cyberspace and people could, you know, access it or find out stuff about you?" And he sort of just went dead silent. It's like he hadn't thought about it, which I thought was interesting.
It's a good backup in the future. You know.
Lewis, you've been very patient there waiting for this is very much a good segue into talking about more of the, I guess, technical side of things, you know. So Lewis, in terms of the governance with AI, how can we ensure that it stays safe, fair and transparent, especially when working with sensitive data from a technology perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Susan's an expert of that anyway. Susan pretty much summed it up. But yeah, look, when talking about AI governance, I think the key is to take a holistic and business-led approach into implementing AI and thinking about different I'm going to call it pillars on how to implement it, right? So companies need to think about aligning the AI strategy with the business outcomes they're seeking, the values, the mission, and ultimately the trust that they put in their stakeholders, right? So all of these things are important when implementing AI and for a good governance foundation that ultimately it's going to lead to a framework naturally. So we need to think about things of assessing your AI maturity and where you want to go, where you're at the moment, and where you're going. So because as Susan said, right, you probably want to start simple, easy, and then move on to a more advanced kind of AI and implementation. We've seen too often that some customers want to go all in, and that's probably not the best approach. You might want to take a step back and think about, well, why don't we start on a more simple way and then move forward. Yeah, that's one piece. The other piece is probably the technical readiness, and everything evolves pretty much around the data. AI is nothing without data, and there are studies around that where companies fail too often because they think AI is doing nothing for them, and it's just because the data is not in the right place. So we need to consider things like the data quality. So if the quality of the data is not there, if you're feeding AI with useless data, you're going to get a useless output. So that's important. You need to consider management of the data, and that's a piece of the change management process and thinking about the ways of working, right? Because now we need to think about, well, if AI is going to be fed with all of these inputs, where do we want to store that input for AI to reach that data? Mm-hmm. So you need to make it accessible, and you need to make it, it needs to be available for AI to use. And obviously with all the data security components around that. So which data do you want to fit the AI with, and which should not be there. So all these systems need to be interconnected and for an efficient use of AI. Then we have the ethical and the ethical component, and that's where we need to think about, is the system that I'm about to implement auditable, for example? So you want to be able to audit that and then take steps to fix or tweak whatever it is that you need to tweak to get the right outputs, I guess. Think about bias, which is related to the audit of the AI system as well. And one important thing that Susan mentioned was, and Beck as well, was the perception of AI pretty much. So you want not only how AI is perceiving the data as a system, but how your stakeholders are perceiving data. So internally, as your workforce, are they thinking that this is this thing here to replace me, or is this thing here to augment my productivity and my efficiency? And with your stakeholders, right? So am I interacting with a system that is profiling me and is getting my information and it's going out somewhere to do some weird stuff, right? So, or is it here to just help me in the process and gather just some basic data? So all these things we need to think about when implementing AI, and thinking about how easy that we want to tweak it to get it there. Yeah. Another component, obviously, we have to think about is things like how is it called? All the regulations that you need to think about as well, right? So if you're following certain security frameworks or regulations like GDPR, or if you are SOC 2 audited every year, then you need to think about, well, aligning AI to those frameworks in the right way. And obviously a policy, right? You need to have your policies, but not something that is just going to sit there and, eating dust there in some folder. So it's something that needs to be digestible and comprehensible for, the internal use of it. And basically, creating that awareness that this is here to help us, but we also need to use it in a certain way to make sure that we're going to get the right outputs.
I think too, Liz, that that governance piece is really quite different when it comes to NFP as well, right? Like we were talking about before. So, I think the compliance piece, the accountability piece is different for NFP. You know, often external funding, you know, that transparency piece is kind of different maybe than it might be in a big health insurance, for example. So it can be quite a different way to think of AI in this space than say other spaces.
Yeah.
The perception one is really interesting. The use case I really love to use is, it's not an NFP one, but it's a use case that everybody would understand it. It's when it comes to sort of recruitment. So we had a customer about 6 months ago that wanted to use AI in the recruitment process. They were hiring heavily and they wanted to get through the applications quite quickly in the first round. So their idea was to use AI for that purpose. And we had this really quite heated and interesting conversation about whether or not that was a good idea. You could say on one spectrum that candidates will come to that process and think, oh my God, you guys use AI, that's so great, you're such a forward-thinking organisation, how amazing. You could also say that people go, you didn't even bother to come to the interview, this isn't somewhere I want to work, right? So, you've really got to think about, and that may be, there's no right answer to that, right? We all might think one or the other of those situations. So you've really got to again be thinking, who's the target audience? What are they going to be thinking about? And some of this, I think, why we say start small is some of this you don't know, right? You've got to co-design it, you've got to test it, you've got to sort of see what the impact really is going to be before you know necessarily how to make the right step, right? Which is why it makes it sort of iterative process.
It's interesting because in a previous life I also had a case of an NFP, not in Australia, thankfully, that they wanted to build a conversational AI to ask questions about mental health conditions on veterans of war. And this is really tricky, right? It's something that you need to consider. Do you want to go there, or do you want a human actually doing that? So it's an interesting topic, and it's something definitely to consider the pros and cons of when applying AI. And I think lastly, the last pillar would probably be the adoption and training, right? So training not only the technical teams on how to manage AI, but also the workforce that ultimately is going to use the AI, because AI is not simply just putting a simple prompt and asking questions to a conversational AI. It's how do you prompt the right way to get the right output. And on top of that, the change management process, which Huw knows a lot better than everyone else, is getting that right mindset that there is this new tech coming, and because we need to get the data in the right place, then there will be some new digital ways of working to structure that data the right way for AI to use. So all of these things ultimately, as I said, is going to build naturally a framework for a company to effectively govern AI.
I think on the capability building too, we talk about, I think there's a lot in the market now about AI training, and I'll go do a 2-hour course and now I know AI, and I think we all know that it's really not about training. It's definitely not click here. Sure, you can get some prompting expertise, and that's a skill, but it really is this more capability building piece, and this behaviours, which is why the change piece is really important, because even at Solentive, we've had to be on this journey for about the last 5 years, and even I still sometimes go to the old note, to put it that way. You are changing your own behaviours as well, because it's so ingrained in our habitual processes, right? So I think we've got to be patient as well. That sort of really does require a lot of support. And Huw was talking to us with a project we were doing the other day around, you're not done when you go live, and I was like, oh no, damn it, you are. But you definitely not. You've got that piece around, probably 6 months of really embedding change into the organisation, and that can be tiring, right? Because we all do a big project, and then we think, we want it to be over and behind us. But I think, you might be able to talk to that, Susan, around the change you're going through. Around, it's quite a lot of work still to go, right?
Yeah, well, I think you're right, Beck. That's where actually the work begins, doesn't it? Even though you've spent years developing it and you think everyone's there and then actually everyone starts using it. So, yeah, I think you're right. And actually, I think the bit for me is not so much the momentum with the teams that are starting to use it. I actually think it's with the project team that have been working on it for years and then they've launched and it's like ready. Yeah. And then everyone's like, oh no, I've got all these questions, I've got all this more, I've got all these needs. And it's like you've got to keep them, engaged. Well, not engaged. They're engaged, but you, like all of us, right? When we finish something, it's nice to complete it. So, I think it's a constant.
So when are we done?
Yeah, never, no.
Yeah. There's certainly many things to consider, and I'm really happy to see that we haven't lost anyone in the conversation just yet, because there's a lot to consider, right, when it comes to AI adoption, especially for NFPs. And I guess one of the last questions I want to throw at Beth before we open up the floor for some Q&A is, what would you say is a low risk, high impact way for NFPs to start their AI journey?
Good question. I mean, I think anything that is in the administrative automation space is always lower risk. It's more internally focused. I would though say also in NFP you could think about things like your volunteer management, donor management, those sort of, again, those things that sort of don't necessarily touch the vulnerable population that you often can be dealing with. I think it's really, productivity and that sort of stuff is an obvious way to start, but then you can get into sort of automation, predictive data and those type of things as well without actually surfacing AI to an end user, which is probably the more risky area when it comes to NFP and governance and those service delivery models is probably what I'd suggest.
Yeah. And I think some of the participants here might have even seen quite a common offering you might see from technology providers is some sort of AI or data readiness kind of, it's more of a stepping stone, just sort of take a step back, do a bit of an overview of your systems and just see where the gaps are, see where you might need to take that first step before actually taking.
I think like low risk, high impact use cases, a lot of volume, not a lot of risk, they're really good places to start to get some return, on your efforts. Yeah.
Well, it's a conversation I'm sure we could go on for hours for. Yeah. I'd love to invite anyone to ask any burning questions you've got from our discussion, and perhaps you can specifically ask one of our panelists. Jamie.
Thank you so much for the conversation. I'm interested, we talk a lot about process, people and systems, and sometimes we think about strategies being out there a little bit. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit, I don't know who would want to talk about, but what does strategy play in AI, digital, tech, organisational strategy? Because you haven't really touched on strategy a bit.
Yeah, okay.
Where does that sit in the context of
it's an interesting question. I'll give it a go, Jamie. I think a lot of people are talking about like having a very clear AI strategy. I would say it's all got to be linked. So any technology change that you do has to be business led. Yeah. So I would say you really want to have, obviously you're going to have your business strategy, whether that be on a page or very comprehensive. You definitely have one. You then really want to have a holistic digital strategy aligned to that, and again, these are things that can just be what is our 1 to 2 year ambitions, digitally, and then I think your sort of AI strategy comes into that. And again, I'd say it all links together as your AI strategy is how you're going to use AI, and sort of what Susan was talking about. These are definite no-go areas. These are experimental areas, etc. And then I think that would then be supported by like your AI framework, how you're going to govern and manage it, and your AI culture. What is the impact on our people, their identity, that sort of stuff. So I'd sort of say that's how it all links together. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else? I have a bit more of a fun question. There's a lot of like hype around AI, and there's a lot of fear, as we were talking about before. What would perhaps either of you, whoever wants to step forward, what's a myth about AI that we've been talking about? I've got one that comes to mind if no one can think of one. What's a myth that we can debunk?
That it's going to replace all of our jobs.
That's what I
I think particularly in the support care area, right? Like for me, it's our whole organisation's built on relational-based care, really, and many of people in here, and you just can't get that from a machine. So
You don't want to as well.
well, and your brain it just changes when you interact with humans, even from the team's environment to in the room, right? Our brains just deal differently, and I think that's actually a key part of actually achieving really good outcomes for people in support. So I feel like that idea that it's going to take over, and look, maybe I'm going to be wrong in a decade's time when I go to hospital and the robot is serving me, but I don't think so. So yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing, it's sort of building on that point, but we often think about what is the future going to be, and it's often we feel like we're playing this game where the tech overlords are the dealing the cards. We just got to play them however they come, and I don't buy into that. And I think there is this doom catastrophizing. So whenever someone says, "Oh, well, no one's going to have jobs and all of this," and I always say, "Well, is that what we want?" And I don't think it is. And I think humans tend to create the world that we want. It's not just something which happens by chance. We tend to shape it. And so I like people to take ownership of the fact that we can actually create the future we want individually and as organisations and society. So I don't think it's going to become something we don't want. There may be sort of hiccups and failures along the way, as there has with all technology. Like even social media, we see some damaging components of that, but ultimately people want it, so it's persisted. But we start getting smarter about how we use it and the negative consequences of that, and we reshape it and we create rules and regulations around it. So I'm positive about it, and I think that is a big myth. It's like we have no control over it, and I genuinely believe we do.
Yeah, I sit on your side of the optimistic fence, and one thing I heard recently was that we used to think about AI having hallucinations. Has anyone heard that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the way that we were reframing it now is that it's not a hallucination, it's just error. You know, and there's a small margin of error, and us as humans, we're built for that. We're all making errors every day, right? So we can overcome error. I've got two more questions.
Can I say one just as well, just about the... we'll go to the question, sorry. Yeah.
Whatever your thought is.
No. Yeah.
Simon, you had a question then?
Yeah, just back on the replacement of care, it's quite interesting. I guess aging population throughout the world, huge trend, pretty much in every country, except probably Africa and India. If we had the choice of, you're not going to have a carer, you're not going to have a companion versus here's a humanoid that is pretty close. You don't get the human urge when you're not going to get the flesh and the blood and the chemistry, but there's at least somebody you can talk to, he remembers you, they've got all the information of your family, etc. Open floor. I mean, you can't say yes or no. It's probably, it's not a clear cut.
It's complementary, right? I think it's complementary.
Yeah.
So I
It's quite
don't think,
interesting space to get into.
that's not a thing. It's just that it's not the only thing. Yeah. So I think, again, just like all, all the jobs to be done that we all have, I think if AI can sort of help, or robotics can help with like a portion of that, to sort of mean that then the relational side of things is freed up. Absolutely perfect, right? You can have this sort of yin and yang. I don't know what you think about that, Susan, but I think it's not a either or choice, right?
Yeah, but I've had this conversation with people recently where they were like, but if you can't get a worker, what do you do? Before I worked in mental health, I worked in dementia, and I went to Japan, and they were already using robots. And I remember being in an aged care home there, and a robot came in to deliver something, but there were still workers. So I think it is the complementary, and obviously the robot very much looks like a robot, but look, I could see the benefits, right? It was helping to deliver some of the medication, as an example. It was bringing in some of the morning tea, but then that kind of really human connection, right, of saying, morning Susan, what would you like to do today, and let me do that with you. Like at that stage when I was there, the people in that place really liked playing table tennis. It was actually a skill they didn't lose even with advanced dementia, and I'm not sure if the robot could do that. Maybe, but it would be different.
Want to do it with a robot.
Yeah, I'd be really interested one day if they look at this and the changes in the brain, because even with things like dementia, we know that that connection actually makes a difference to people. They might not be able to say what it was, but their mood and their sense of contentment and all those things definitely show up when you've had a human interaction, a care-based, compassionate interaction. So I'm really interested if they could replicate that in a robot or something else.
And just a quick follow-up, but there's a trend in very younger generation. So COVID, you didn't really have a lot of interaction. You were kind of screwed a bit with getting used to rejection and build relationships, etc. And the trend of people literally having the her movie companion AI companion, and actually feeling a lot more comfortable with in AI and being like, this is my partner and they understand me. I don't get pushback and I don't have arguments and in a comfort bubble. And it's scary and that it's really hard to get out of that. There's like there's segment in society, very small, very extreme, but that will be a use case, and it's happening right now. So.
But what does that? Oh, sorry. Now it's good. This could go on for hours. And then what does that do to you though if you've got something that constantly agrees with you? Because it's funny. I had someone the other day tell me they asked their AI to disagree and tell them all the things that's wrong about something because they said it was so nice to it all the time.
The toxic positivity. Even with just even Copilot, right? You'll ask you've got a great idea, Rebecca. That was not really a good idea. Don't tell me it was.
Exactly. It's fascinating.
So a hypothetical question that comes to mind there, which I'll leave you with before we go to Matt's question, is if I'm nice to AI, will it be nicer to me and give me better results and better answers? But I'll leave you with that. Matt, you had a question and then we'll finish up.
Yeah, I'm still sitting with the sense of being abandoned by humans, being in aged care of the robots with my younger friends. That's a bit of a kind of extremist alarmist. My question, I guess, was about, because what I'm reflecting on is working in the health and homelessness sector, where actually from a data infrastructure point of view, I feel like we're still catching up. And I know, I can see that AI has the potential to solve a lot of pain points for a small homelessness service, for example, that has to do incident management, and would really love to have a better understanding of outcomes that it delivers to people, not just activities. So I think I'm just kind of thinking, sitting here and processing that kind of fundamental question of, we've still got services that have very limited access to data infrastructure. They have to input into fragmented data systems that, this funder needs this system and this funder has that system. That there's a kind of a baseline capacity that's not even there before we translate into other things. So I just wonder, are we going to see solutions to that in the first instance, or are we going to have a real disparity between the kind of the haves and the have-nots in terms of people who are in the data stone age, who are just kind of struggling with things that are held together, versus people who can go off and fly because they've got the resources available.
I mean, we're potentially seeing some of that now. I mean, the one answer I would give is there's definitely sort of point solutions that are increasingly accessible in certain sort of domains and things like that, so certain product solutions. I think the piece around have and have-nots is a really interesting one. I think that's where in the industry there's a lot of people campaigning and advocating around government about making sort of, AI at least at a certain level. Otherwise, you will definitely get this, that's when it can start to be used in a bad way, right? If you've got a small amount at the top who have access to everything and then everybody else at the bottom. So, I think these are kind of interesting conversations. I don't think there's a solution. I think that people are still honestly working some of that stuff out. I would say, if you're from those organisations, there's certainly small incremental ways to get started, but I think yes, you're always going to have, particularly when you're within that ecosystem, you're always going to have the difficulty around engaging with governments and data and those sort of stuff that you just don't have access to, right? So I don't think that's solved yet, to be honest.
But I do think we could get better in the ecosystem, non-for-profit to non-for-profit, particularly about data sharing.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah.
I know you've got to be really careful around that, but I know there's some really good examples around where smaller and larger not-for-profits have actually committed, particularly to around sharing insights, and so there's not the disparity between the large and the small. And government pits NFPs against each other, and you've got the NDIS, free market. There's a whole range of competitive aspects to what we do as organisations, and I think we can lead a lot better. We can be the stewards of that. So
I think
Great point.
And I think also
meeting, we can carry on the conversation over breakfast. We just have one last question over here.
My question was for you, Huw, in relation to, in my experience, not-for-profits, which are health institutes and charities, get bogged down in systems and process. So I was curious if you would elaborate on your concept of change leadership being different to change management.
Yeah, sure. So I think change management is needed, but I actually think we need change governance, change management, and change leadership. And I think the governance side, and each of those three I sort of put them as a Venn diagram, kind of three circles interacting with each other. And so the governance is really decision makers, leadership, executives, board, around application of resources, deciding what projects to implement in alignment with strategy. The management is really like your project team, and so that requires detailed thinking around impact analysis, driving a lot of the engagement with employees, training, communication, and all of that kind of thing. And then the leadership component is a lot with the managers and employees, and so that's and there's a change leadership element within all three of these circles, but I think a lot of it is within the managers and the executives who go out and influence behaviour. So largely, it's what I try and do is teach those managers and executives how to engage people in change, how to tackle some of the resistance points. And there's lots of psychological research around it. So some is around fear, habit formation. It's much easier for us to follow existing habits than to lean into new. There's things like the endowment effect, where we overvalue what we already have and we undervalue things we don't have. There's loss aversion, where people naturally focus far more on things that they stand to lose rather than what they can potentially gain. So anytime during change, we're always thinking about what am I going to lose here rather than about the potential gains. And how you can use these kind of concepts, which are literally innate within us as a result of our evolutionary psychology, how to flip them around and to use them to your advantage to drive change. So that's how I do it anyway. And so helping them understand those. And so that's the really distinctly human component. I think there's a lot of change managers out there, and change management as a discipline has become, I think, somewhat mistakenly a project implementation methodology, almost a way of just supporting the solution team to implement. And it should be about more than that. When I studied it 20 years ago in university, it was inherently about behaviour. But it's sort of lost that. It's become more of a project planning logistical exercise, like get the comms out, get the training done, implement the solution, but it's a lot more than that. So that's where I think the change leadership comes in.
Over-processized as well, right? Like all these things are sort of scalable. I think if you understand
templates and
principles, it doesn't have to be overdone. Sometimes it's overdone.
Sometimes not-for-profit boards and senior leadership teams, delegate change when it's conceptualized as just rolling something out.
Yeah,
or
training and comms.
Or developing a process or a pathway. A few big issues come to mind, like the rollout of NDIS. Let's hire people, let's buy computers, let's get some certifications going. And now,
Job done, right?
now NDIS, costing more than health and defence combined.
Yes.
That just resonated with me when you raised that, so thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the things just on that is we don't always anticipate the impacts. We try and change something, we don't think about, so the people, process, system component. If you change a system, it's going to impact processes, it's going to impact people. If you change a process, it's going to impact the people and probably the systems. Yeah. And same when you implement a giant policy like NDIS, we often think, this is how it's expected to be. We don't anticipate all these flow-on impacts. We don't anticipate that maybe people are going to take advantage and rot at the system. We don't anticipate that there could be cost blowouts. We don't anticipate demographic changes and population increases. And so all these different things, that should be part of a change exercise. And this is where a lot of the predictions, I think, are wrong about AI. We say, well, AI is just going to replace all these jobs, but we don't think about the broader system, and actually there's a lot of checks and balances with that. And actually, the point I forgot to make earlier, and I was going to might make it now, is that people always say the pace of change is increasing, and I disagree. I think the pace of technological innovation has sort of skyrocketed with these AI generative tools, but that isn't what change is. That's just one part of it. That's just a tool, an advancement there, and that's partly because there's trillions of dollars in Silicon Valley funding people and a ton of people making a lot of money off it. So that's where the innovation is. But change is actually about the whole system. It's about the people, it's about society, businesses, customers, all these different things, and regulation as well. And so there's all these things which slow the pace of change, but I think that's a good thing. I think it's a manageable, digestible process, and this transformation we're going through is like 10 to 20 years. It's not happening overnight. So I think that's good news.
Great. Thanks, Huw. I appreciate that. And we can certainly continue the discussion over breakfast. Thank you so much to our 4 panelists. We'll give them a round of applause. Just lastly, if you want to just do a quick, in 5 minutes, you can sort of assess your digital maturity of where your organisation's at. I'll pass this on in an email as well, or you can scan it now and have a go now. There's food over here on your right. Feel free to order another coffee and just bill it to Solentive. So we're happy to give you a second coffee. And yeah, feel free to mingle and hang around. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys.